On today's show, an emergency podcast on a Monday evening, Kobe Bufkin is no longer a member of the Atlanta Hawks. We'll get into how it happened, why it happened, and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 2055 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you on a Monday evening here in mid-September. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. And right now, if you're a new customer, bet just $5 and if your bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the FanDuel app right now and check it out today. I also want to encourage you at the top of the podcast, as I always do, to make Locked On Hawks your first listen each and every day. Check us out. Subscribe to the show. I appreciate everybody new to the podcast that might be here for this episode. We're on Apple. We're on Spotify. We're on YouTube. So please like this video as you're watching it and tell your friends about the pod. I had a podcast scheduled. I even recorded it that I'm going to be holding for later on this week because there is some emergency podcast level news for the Hawks. And no, it's not a blockbuster. It's not a top 5 guy on the team changing teams. It's not the DeJounte Murray trade or something like that. But it is a meaningful move, a recognizable name, and a pretty interesting sea change happening with the Hawks at this moment in time. So the big thing is Kobe Bufkin is no longer a member of the Hawks at this point on Monday. Shams Charania first reported, I later confirmed this, that the Hawks are trading Bufkin to the Brooklyn Nets for cash considerations. Friend of the podcast, Mike Scotto, reported that the cash is very minimal, about $110,000 going from Brooklyn to Atlanta. That is a bare minimum throw-in by NBA standards. So this is basically a salary dump, that simply. The Hawks do create a trade exception in the deal, but it is a relatively small one that is smaller than other ones that they already have for Capella, for Bogdanovich, etc. So that's not a huge part of this either. Those are the particulars. I will later on in the podcast, as you might expect, go into the roster situation for the Hawks, how it affects that. Also the financial situation for the Hawks, which is certainly a big part of this deal. But there are a lot of angles to discuss. And if you are a regular listener, you will know this already. But if you're a new listener, I'll tell you this now. I am big on context and nuance and giving you the whole picture of what I think and what the situation calls for on all sides. And we have a lot of that later on in the show, I promise you. There's a lot to get to. But I do feel like I have to lead with a pretty simple and frank sentiment and takeaway. And basically what this means is that at least part of this transaction, at a bare minimum, part of the transaction, at least from the front office on the Hawks side, is that someone somewhere, or maybe all of them to some degree, do not believe in Kobe Bufkin anymore, to the point that they kind of needed to keep him on the roster. They quite literally gave him away here. This is a salary dump. There wasn't even like a middling second rounder coming back for him to save face. Like, for instance, when they traded AJ Griffin, they were able to get get a second round pick back for AJ, who then retired shortly after. This is a punt on Bufkin. And Brooklyn was a team that had the ability to take Kobe in without having to send anything back, which I'm sure was part of the calculus here for the Hawks. And look, there's a lot of angles to this as well. It's important to remember that Auntie Soleil, the current general manager of the Hawks, recently promoted, had a great summer at the helm, was not in the front office, much less as the GM, when Bufkin was drafted 27-ish months ago, 2+ years ago. Auntie was not in the organization at that point in time. Neither were his top 2 lieutenants, Bryson Graham and Peter Dinwiddie, who were both added this summer. They were nowhere to be found. So this is a front office, at least a top 3 in the front office, that has basically no tie to Kobe Bufkin. And now that does not mean that they had to move on from him or that they wouldn't possibly have liked him, but it's useful to remember that context when you see a salary dump deal like this, because while Auntie's not talked yet, this is all still in the reported phase at this point. I think it's more than fair to read this as the current front office just not believing in Bufkin too much. And that is understandable. I want to be very clear about that. Like, I think I'm higher on him than some people are, but that is an understandable takeaway for the front office to have. I have said this many times before, but Quinn Snyder, the head coach, was a Kobe Bufkin fan at one point at least. He might still be, but Quinn was definitely a Kobe guy. Like, he liked him. Does he still believe that much? I don't know, but he was the one holdover in the organization beyond the owner who I know had an affinity for Kobe Bufkin. Like, he was a Kobe guy. That could have changed. We don't know. But Quinn does not make the decisions. Keep that in mind. But the reality is that even, and look, there were reasons on the court to be skeptical. I will certainly grant that. But the reality is he just hasn't played enough in the first 2 years of his career. I did a deep dive earlier this summer with Glenn Willis on the podcast about Kobe. If you want to listen to that for old time's sake, please go ahead and do that. But Kobe played 27 games in the NBA across 2 seasons due to various injuries. Last year was cut short pretty early in the year. He did flash some, particularly defensively at the NBA level. I think people kind of forgot that. He was really good defensively when he was playing in the NBA, but just not a huge record of him playing. Offensively, it was much more of a mixed bag. He was up and down in Summer League. There were some pops in the G League. He was really good in the G League 2 years ago, but that's a long time ago at a lower level. So it was clearly a mixed record of success for Kobe, given that he's not just been able to play enough. Like sometimes you need a change of scenery. I know that Shams used that, maybe it's terminology or something close to that in his reporting. I am sure that Kobe's side of things would not, mind that too much right now. But at the same time, like he needs a fresh start because he hasn't been able to play. That's the biggest thing with this whole situation. If he'd been playing, they would have learned more about him to this point in time. Doesn't mean it definitely would have popped, but they would know more. Right now, it's kind of a incomplete, which is not where you want to be after 2 seasons as a mid-first round pick. One more thing to remember in this case is the theory of like why Bufkin was drafted where he was for the Hawks. Like, I know that most of the focus lately on Bufkin has been about backup point guard. And we'll talk about that later on in the podcast. But that was never like his pigeonholed thought or prognosis coming out of the draft. He was probably always going to play a little bit of point guard, but he was billed by the team and by me and other people as a 6'5" guy who could play both guard spots, who could defend both guard spots, play on or off the ball on offense. That was the pitch with Bufkin. Not just like, hey, backup point guard for 15 minutes a game. The hope was he could be like a third guard who could play with both a Trey kind of player. And remember, he was on the team with DeJounte at that point in time. Maybe it was with or without one of those guys. Regardless, it was not a one position draft pick. But the reality is they traded for Dyson Daniels 1 year later, who immediately took the ultra premium version of that role, starting 2 guard with backup point guard potential. Then they also went out this summer and got Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who, by the way, is another guy who does kind of similar things to Kobe. Now, Kobe is the most natural on-ball creation guy of the 3 of them, but that was still only a theory as well because, again, he hadn't been able to play enough at the NBA level, and the shooting was a question mark. He's smaller than those guys. Like, I get all the concerns. But, look, beyond the injuries, and that's a huge part of this, beyond the uncertainty created by the injuries, a huge part of this, the roster changed, the front office changed, and Bufkin was probably just also out of sight, out of mind to some degree. Like he just hadn't been playing. That's the reality. So for me, there is a world still in which Kobe Bufkin becomes a rotation player in the NBA. Not going to be a star by any means. I think he can still play in the NBA. That's not a guarantee at this point as a rotation guy, but I could still kind of believe in him to some degree based on my pre-draft, based on some summer league stuff, etc. But also, if you listen to the show all summer long on this podcast, even I, as a relative Kobe Bufkin believer, was pointing out, including on that deep dive with Glenn, that he was not going to be gifted minutes this year. He was going to have to earn them in training camp. Like there were other options. The Hawks were never going to be just flat out, hey, Kobe, you're the backup point guard this year. That wasn't going to happen. He was going to be in a competition at a bare minimum this season, whether he was on the team or not. And also, I was talking about this then all summer long about the real possibility or potential that Kobe's fourth-year team option was going to be declined potentially. Not a guarantee, but was like certainly we talked about it on the podcast. They have until, well, now it's the Nets, have between now and late October to decide on that. So that tells you right there that it was not a guarantee he'd be around long-term no matter what. Ultimately, you can kind of come down on this wherever you want to, on whether the injuries were to blame for Kobe's lack of success in Atlanta, whether he just wasn't good enough. That's a reasonable point to also make if you believe that. There's evidence on both sides of that. But in the end, what we do know is that the Hawks traded him for basically nothing to dump his salary right now. And it's a first-round pick, granted by a previous regime, but a first-round pick that netted the Hawks basically nothing because he didn't even play for 2 years and now he's gone. And if you want to be a negative viewpoint person on this, the Hawks had back-to-back first-round picks in the middle of the first round. They basically gave them nothing. AJ Griffin for one season gave them something, but then it was Griffin for a low-end sell-low trade and then Bufkin for a sell-low trade the year after. Obviously, they did a lot in the meantime, getting more picks with the Dyson trade, getting Ricochet, all that stuff. But having a 2-year kind of dud, essentially, from the Hawks standpoint of first-round picks is tough. Fortunately, they're still set up pretty well right now, given the future of what they have on the roster. But yeah, I mean, you can't read it any other way. There is nuance, there is context, but one more time, at least part of this, if not most of this, is the Hawks signaling that they are just not really ready to be in the Bufkin business anymore. And that's kind of understandable at this point in time. All right, more to come on the podcast, including the roster situation for the Hawks, backup point guard, financials, what they might do to replace Bufkin on the roster, and much more after a word from our partners. The NFL season is finally here. FanDuel is making sure that you are ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. And right now, if you are a new customer at FanDuel, bet just $5. And if your first bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel is great in so many ways. And one reason is that because it fits really however you like to bet on sports, whether it's player props, same-game parlays, straight bets, over-unders. They have money lines, futures, even live betting as the action unfolds. It's all there for you at FanDuel. They make every game more exciting, whether you're watching your favorite team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy guys in your lineups. And then every single sport you can think of as well, from the NFL, college football, the NBA, of course, we talk about on this podcast all the time, plus baseball, hockey, golf, tennis, soccer. They have auto racing, boxing, MMA, and so much more. FanDuel is quick. It's easy. They're fast to pay out when you win. It's the best way to add a little bit more energy to your Sunday. So the question is, are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app right now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. Put your first $5 bet and get $300 in bonus bets at FanDuel.com and the FanDuel app. Check it all out today. All right, before I dive into the roster stuff, there's a financial part of this transaction that I kind of alluded to it already a little bit, but people were asking, by the way, just one more question before we dive into that. If it was possible that Bufkin and his camp asked for a trade, I would say as of Monday night when I'm recording this podcast, I've not heard that at all. I would say it's at least possible. We've seen guys that are on the lower level, not to use a name like this, but Cam Reddish is one that is recent Hawks vintage, who asked for a trade eventually. So it wouldn't be totally crazy if that were to happen and he had seen the writing on the wall or whatever. But I would also never assume that unless I actually heard it, and I haven't heard that. So alas, I wish Kobe the best. I think Brooklyn is actually pretty interesting in a rebuilding phase for him. At the same time, they also did add a bunch of guards in this year's draft, so kind of a weird spot for Kobe to go to. But the long and short of it is I've not heard that, and unless I do, I'm going to assume no, but we'll see. Anyway, financially, Bufkin was set to make $4.5 million this season for the Hawks. And he had that $6.9 million fourth-year team option for next year that they had to decide whether to pick up by the end of October. So with that off the books now entirely, the Hawks have 12 guys, if you include Beat Krejci and Mo Gay, who I am going to include. Technically, they are on non-guaranteed contracts, but it would be a shock to the entire NBA world if the Hawks were to cut Beat or Mo. So I'm going to factor them in just to be safe. They have 12 guys, if you include those guys, on the roster on guaranteed or mostly guaranteed contracts. That gives them about $178-ish million in salary. But you can't have 12 players. You got to have at least 14 to begin the season. So if you add in either Caleb Houston or N'Faly Dante, who were on non-guaranteed deals, either one of those guys, but not both, you'd be at $180-ish million. Now, that would leave you in a projected luxury tax space of $7.7 million below the line. That is meaningfully more and different than where they were before this move. So that is one angle here that they potentially did this for, is to create salary flexibility below the tax line. To be clear, as I already seen people mess this up already, it's somebody's fault. This stuff's very complicated. I get that. The Hawks do not have cap space to sign someone for like $7.5 million. They can't do that. They're well over the cap. They have to use an exception to exceed the cap. The only exception they have to just sign someone right now is the biannual exception. That's about $5.1 million. That's what they could use unilaterally to sign anyone available right now. The most potential guy in that slot is probably Al Horford. Come back to him later on. They do have two trade exceptions. They have the Bogey trade exception for about $13 million and the Capella trade exception for about $6.5 million. Those are not combinable together with anything else. Trade exceptions have to be acted on their own, but they could use one of those as well if they wanted to trade for someone to kind of replace quote unquote Kobe on the roster. The long and short of it, though, is this is a key point. I want to emphasize this really strongly. The Hawks did not need to do this move financially unless they wanted to acquire someone who makes more than the minimum. One more time. This was not a necessary move for the Hawks unless they wanted to acquire someone who makes more than the minimum. Now, regardless, they could just exceed the tax line, but I have been operating and talking about this all summer long. The assumption is, I think, informed, reported assumption that the Hawks are not going to exceed the tax line based on their moves this year. So if you operate that as a cap, basically, even with the roster exactly how it was, with Bufkin on the roster, not traded, they could have signed any player available to their minimum. That includes Al Horford, D'Anthony Melton, Russell Westbrook, name your favorite player who's available. Anybody could have signed for their minimum, and the Hawks would have still been under the tax. Keep that in mind. So financially, the only way this makes sense from a dollars and cents standpoint, a cap tax standpoint, is if the Hawks now turn around and acquire someone either via trade or via signing who is making more than the minimum. Otherwise, they didn't need to do this financially. Again, they might just want a Bufkin to be off the roster, fresh start, whatever. That's at least a possibility. But as far as dollars and cents, they didn't have to do this to sign anybody to the minimum. Keep that in mind. If they don't add someone for more than the minimum, I got to say, I will be confused. Not because I am a Bufkin stan, I'm not doing that, but they didn't have to be in the Bufkin business long term, and they still could have not traded him for nothing on September 15th. There's a middle ground there. And what that is they could have, if they don't want to keep him beyond this year, they could have declined the option. That'd have been a very reasonable thing to do. It's $7 million or so, but they still could have had him on the roster making $4.5 million this year, which does two things. He didn't have to play in that example if they didn't want him to, but they could have used his salary later on as trade matching. They could have also had another guy on their roster who could be a guard for depth. Now, if they didn't believe in him enough to keep him, this part of the reason why he's not on the team, of course. But if something happened to Trey or something happened to Dyson or Nikhil, they could probably use another guy who can handle the ball at a professional level on the roster. So that's at least a wrinkle on this. Now, doing the move now only really clicks into place if they had a good idea of like something they want to do. They don't have to have that. I don't want to overstate it. They don't have to turn around and do something else tomorrow or today or whatever. But it would make a lot more sense financially and like the way that NBA salary caps are managed if they had a move that was not just a sign on a minimum player, because it doesn't really make sense. Like they could have just cut some. Anyway, I'll leave it there for now. But the devil's advocate point to that is that if they were ready to sell Bufkin at this price, which was basically for nothing, a full-on salary dump, maybe they just value the in-season tax flexibility. So, for example, if they signed a minimum contract, they would have been not like right against the tax, but they would have had very little flexibility to kind of do in-season stuff. So, like if they wanted to look up in February and make a trade, they would have been kind of up against it a little bit more. Perhaps Ansi, in the way that he values flexibility and, to use his term, optionality, they could have potentially, and I think reasonably kind of thought that getting this money off the books now would give them a lot of flexibility because they do have that bogey trade exception. And if they want to use that and they don't fill this spot in the near future, that could be like a $7 million player they could go ahead and trade for without having to match salary in season. That's not going to be able to do. You can't do that if you sign somebody. So long and short, there's a lot of angles that I won't keep going down these rabbit holes. But if they prefer to sign a minimum guard and wait and trade Kobe like this, it would have been more for in-season flexibility. I don't love that standpoint, but it would make a lot more sense if they were to either use the biannual on someone or trade for someone who makes more than the minimum, etc. But regardless, they might have just wanted Kobe off the roster, and that might be the simple part of this. All right, there's more to get to, including the roster, what the Hawks actually need, because they do have a little bit of a question, I would say, at backup point guard. We'll get into that and more in just one moment. This show is brought to you by 5-Hour Energy. Caffeine just got a flavor upgrade. 5-Hour Energy shots deliver tasty caffeine in 17 bold flavors. Each 2-ounce shot packs the caffeine of a premium 12-ounce cup of coffee, plus B vitamins and nutrients with 0 sugar and 0 crashes. What I love most is how portable and convenient 5-Hour Energy shots are. Big taste, tiny shot. You can take it anywhere and get that boost when you need it. My personal favorite flavor is watermelon because it's refreshing. Gives me the quick lift that I need before a busy day or even during a busy day sometimes. At the same time, I've also been eyeing the strawberry banana flavor to try in the near future. It sounds awesome to me, honestly, and I might try that one up next. I also love how fast Fiber Energy kicks in, and it's sugar-free, of course. It gives me the juice that I want and that I crave without having to do any of the worrying about crashing later on in the day. Enough with the boring, flavorless caffeine. It's time to give your caffeine a flavor upgrade with 5 Energy Shots. That's 5 Energy Shots. Get the favorites that you love or be bold and try something new in-store and online at www.5hourenergy.com or on Amazon today. All right, and to the roster, because that's a question, of course, on the court. Even if you were to put both N'Faly Dante and Caleb Houston on the roster and guarantee those contracts, which they have not been guaranteed right now, the Hawks would still only be at 14. So if they wanted to fill the roster out at 15, they could just sign somebody right now, no penalty. Also, I guess Kobe Johnson's on an Exhibit 10. If they kept him, I'd be very surprised. They could do that, but they do have roster flexibility and roster room. I did the financial breakdown first so people kind of understand the logistics of adding to the roster. But the other big thing with Bufkin was that people were asking over and over and over again about backup point guard today. And I totally get why. People do not listen that much over the summer or read that much. It's been a dead period. But if you followed discourse and on this podcast, other places, Bufkin, for me anyway, I'll speak for myself. I've talked about this a lot. Bufkin was not just the guy that I was projecting to be in the backup point guard role automatically this season. Like, that was not what I was projecting. Was that a possible outcome if he played well and showed more in training camp? Yes, but not the projection. There is a world in which Quinn Snyder's plans for opening day didn't change at all today. Like, at all. And the Hawks might have been going all summer long preparing with the committee behind Trae as a primary option. So as a refresher on that, obviously Trae Young will be playing 35 to 38 minutes a game, maybe 40 in the playoffs, unless he's hurt. That's a given. Behind him, they have options. Dyson Daniels did it last year, backup point guard, and will do it again. I have the Dyson player capsule coming up probably later on this week with Glenn Willis, so stay tuned for that. But Dyson is certainly a backup point guard option. He's going to start at the 2. I'm pretty sure about that, but he can play some point guard. He did it last year. He'll do it again. Nickeil Alexander-Walker has a history of playing some point guard. He can run an offense, be a steward, not a primary offensive engine, I get that, but can play there. That's 2 guys. Luke Kennard, for me, is the underrated part of this whole thing because I believe, based on sourcing and reporting, that they targeted Luke Kennard as a potential backup point guard to pair with either Nickeil or with Dyson. And that makes total sense because Kennard can run the offense and provide the shooting, whereas Dyson and Nickeil can play the defense and hide Kennard on that end of the floor. It's kind of simple, but maybe overly simple, but that is kind of the theory of the case with Kennard. Also, I get that Kennard's a white shooter. I understand that. This is a guy who averaged 6.7 assists per 100 possessions the last 2 seasons in Memphis. He was an on-ball player in college. He's been an on-ball player at times in the NBA. He's a good passer. He's a good field guy. He runs pick and rolls. He's not Garrison Matthews. He actually initiates offense. So that's an option for them as well. And then you have other like depth guys. Like Beat Krejci is more of like the 4th guy of that list. And then you have Keaton Wallace, who I've said a lot, I'll say it again now, was an awesome 2-way last year. He'll be that again, I think, for the Hawks. Not a guy you would like prefer to play an absolute ton, but they are comfortable playing him at a pinch. You get an injury, Keaton will play and be fine and defend and be a steward for you. So they have options. Yes, they still could go external to add someone. I do think it would be wise for the Hawks to acquire a guard of some kind. Is it an absolute necessity? I would say not to the level that I've seen the internet saying in the last hour or 2 since the deal actually happened. Because of what I just said. They have 3 guys who I'd be totally fine with playing point guard minutes. Nickeil, Dyson, and Kennard. Throwing Keaton on a 2-way, that's enough. But I also would, in a perfect world, as the Hawks, add a guard. Now, if you can get Al Horford, you do that first. I would prefer that to signing a guard. Anybody else, I would lean to a guard. Like, if the Hawks were to go out and use this roster spot that they just got back from Kobe on a non-guard who isn't Al Horford, I would like be interested in that. Like, I would scratch my chin about that. Like, I would not really understand that too much. Horford's good enough where you just do it, in my opinion. At guard, though, like, you have options. We'll get into those guys in a second. But it's impossible to project trades. Like, I got a question about Devin Carter a minute ago from the Kings. Yes, a guy that's clearly available in trade. I have no idea if the Hawks would like Devin Carter or would trade for him, but like that's the kind of range of guy, a player who makes $4 to $7 million that you can trade for relatively cheaply would make some sense. I'm not saying it's going to happen, just that kind of area. Then you have the free agents. And look, it's September 15th. It's ugly on the free agent market. Like that's the nature of the beast here. Before anybody asks, they don't have the ability to really make any kind of competitive offer for anyone like Quentin Grimes or Jonathan Kuminga. Like that's not going to happen. So throw it out the window, barring something crazy. But beyond that, like Al Horford is by far the best player available in free agency. By far. It's not even close. I know he's old. I get it. By far the best player available. They could offer him now more than they could yesterday. They could offer him the biannual, which isn't like a ton more for him, but it's more than they could have offered him yesterday. I think there are two guys who are free agents right now who I would offer the biannual to as the Hawks, which is more than the minimum. I would offer it to Horford and DeAnthony Melton. That's it if I was the Hawks. And Horford for sure. Melton's more on the borderline, even though I love him. But just for the record, as of today, everything still points to Golden State being the likely home for both Horford and Melton. It's just that with every passing day, they're kind of waiting on Kuminga, and it's getting late on that front. So if you are someone who's holding out hope for Horford in Atlanta, every day he doesn't sign in Golden State makes it more likely, I would say, but we'll see. And yes, there are other names that you might recognize, but again, the only guys that I'd give more than the minimum to would be Horford and maybe Melton. Malcolm Brogdon signed last week with the Knicks. I would have given him maybe the mid-level, not the mid-level, the biannual, but he's not available anymore. Other names that I'm just going to, I'm not advocating for these players. These are names that are still available who are ostensibly guard-ish players. Monty Morris, Delano Banton, Cam Payne, Gary Payton II, much more of a forward defensively at this point in time, alas. Ben Simmons is not really a guard anymore, but like people asked about him today. Yeah, put him on the list, sure. Russell Westbrook is out there, not who I would probably sign, but certainly a big name and a Hall of Famer. They're not the most inspiring list in the world. Again, it is mid-September for a reason, but they could do nothing. That's their thing. Like if they just want the flexibility, they could simply do something akin to keeping Dante, keeping Houston, and that's 14. That's all you got to do. Or you could, maybe you agree to a long-term deal with Jacob Toppin. Maybe you agree to a long-term deal with Eli Njai. Like, I don't know what they're going to do, but they could just do very little. They don't have to, roster-wise, NBA rules-wise, do anything else if they keep Dante in Houston. You got to have 14 players. That's it. So, long story short, I think it would make more sense, this whole thing with Bufkin, if they had another move lined up, whether it be a trade or a signing of someone like Horford or someone like Melton, etc. If it's not that, and it's just flexibility, then it does kind of tell you what they think about Bufkin and also what they might be thinking about to add to the roster and maybe mid-season if things are going well and they kind of look up in January, February and say, all right, we need one more piece. They have more room to do that. So this is my emergency reaction. I'll have more on this in the coming days. Ansi might talk. I don't know if he's going to about this trade. It's kind of on that borderline where like he may not have to talk about a Kobe Bufkin trade. And also, I'm recording this right now at 6:45 p.m. Eastern time. The Hawks have not announced the deal to this point in time. Now, I have had it confirmed to me by the Hawks. So it's happening, but they haven't announced this yet. And until it's announced, they can't talk about it anyway. So that's my reaction. It's 30 minutes. There's a lot going on here. A lot of uncertainty, a lot more reporting to do on this to see like what the actual plan is for Atlanta. Maybe they make a move tonight. We don't know. But in the meantime, that is Kobe Bufkin, an emergency podcast on a Monday evening, and there's much more to come on Locked on Hawks. So if you're a new listener to the podcast, first of all, thank you for joining us today. Please, we encourage you to subscribe to the podcast. Anywhere you find your podcast, we're on Apple, Spotify, Overcast. We're also on YouTube, so please like the video, leave a comment if you're watching this podcast right now. We appreciate that as well. Ratings and reviews appreciated. Follow the show on X/Twitter at Locked on Hawks. I'm on Blue Sky at BT Rowland. I'm also on Twitter at BT Rowland. And then my non-podcast coverage of the Hawks can be found at patreon.com/BT Rowland. Everybody, I appreciate you being here as always. We'll have more to come later on this week. See you all next time.